Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's exciting to be back with you. It's been a few months since we've run one of our webinars, and it's a good time to do that. I predict that there's quite a few of us at home spending a lot of time looking at our screens, and hopefully this will add a little bit of a learning dimension for all of us. It's my pleasure to be with you today and spend some time on the topic that we have at hand. We'll talk a little bit more about that topic here in a couple of minutes. But just by way of introduction, I'd like to introduce myself and introduce the organization that I associate with. I'm one of the principals of AlignOrg Solutions. I've been doing organization transformation work in large organizations, both publicly traded as well as some private organizations, as well as nonprofits for the better part of my career. And at AlignOrg Solutions, when we talk about organization transformation, those of you that aren't familiar with us will know that we have a fairly distinct methodology that we help executives and leaders think about as they try to clarify their marketplace position, assess and diagnose their organization's capabilities to perform and to deliver. Certainly, we help them redesign their organization and then ultimately implement and effectuate change that will drive improved performance. One of the things that we really hang our hat on is that we help organizations drive or enable differentiation. And we're in a very competitive market space, and so we certainly believe that differentiation is one of the keys to success. Or even earlier today, I was on a call with an organization, and one of the big challenges they're facing is just, how to deal with pressures around pricing and new entrants and commoditization. And so those are pressures that many organizations face. Now, in the course of our work, we do a lot of projects where we are engaged by organizations to come in and actually help do organization transformation work. We lead teams and organizations through our methods. And we also do capability building, where we help build other professionals, usually those that are inside of an organization that are trying to support their company or certain leaders within their organization to make these kinds of transformative changes. Now, as we think about the projects that are going on, over the last couple of weeks, our team has shifted nearly all of our delivery, not surprisingly, because of the COVID-19 situation, to virtual delivery. And beyond just using platforms like GoToMeeting and WebEx and Zoom and so forth, we've brought forward a virtual platform that we're allowing teams to use in a fairly dynamic and real-time way, which is helping us be able to do some of the creative design work that we are known for, but doing it in a virtual way. And it's been an interesting process over the last couple of weeks to try to stand up the capabilities to do that. But I think we're finding some early successes with that. Now, we not only work with a few of these organizations, but we have stories that we like to tell and learnings that we get. Sometimes we read about them in the paper, or no longer in the paper, I suppose, but online. And we learn about how organizations are taking creative approaches to competing, to reinventing themselves, to transforming, and so forth. And so as I go through today's discussion, I hope to share some case studies. Some may come from a few of these organizations, some may come from some others as well. But I find that by using stories, we have a chance to really delve deeper into how organizations think and how they creatively try to solve transformation challenges. Now, as Vani said at the beginning of today's broadcast, I do welcome questions. In fact, I'm more than happy to go off script, if you will, and take questions that might pertain very specifically to the situation you might be dealing with. So as she indicated, please use the comment or the question box over to the right in the panel, and please fire away with your questions, and I'll try to incorporate those into our presentation today and provide some perspective. Now, today, what we wanted to dive into is, over the last few months, I've been just kind of monitoring and looking at what organizations are doing. And I've started to see some patterns. Now, who knows, this is not scientific and probably not validated in any way, shape, or form. But I've been noticing some areas that organizations are meddling with, if you will. They're focusing on, they're spending time in, And so what I wanted to do today was to spend a little bit of time talking about 5 areas that I'm seeing organizations really spend time focusing on transforming. Now, the reasons for that might vary some, but perhaps as you look at your organization, you'll see some similar trends or issues. Maybe not in all 5 areas that I'm going to highlight, but perhaps in other comparable areas, or maybe in 1 or 2 of them. The second thing that I want to be able to spend a few minutes doing as we go through those cases is to think about how do we help executives design their organizations for strategic fit and agility, because we know the market is getting more competitive. And I think all of us in the recent COVID-19 situation have had to become very nimble in a very short amount of time in being able to transform how we do a lot of the work that we currently do. And so we're going to talk about some strategies that can be used to help organizations become more agile, whether that's formal agile or just application of agile principles. And then finally, this is something I've shared in some previous webinars, but I want to highlight it since we're going to talk about 5 areas that are transformation ready today. How do you get started effectively with an organization redesign in one of these critical areas? So that's our game plan. And so without further ado, we're going to jump in. I want to ground, for those that are not familiar, in our practice, a few years ago, we wrote a book called Mastering the Cube. And we talk about organization design, organization alignment, as if it's a Rubiks Cube. And each side of the Rubiks Cube represents a dimension of an organization. One side represents the work of the organization. Another side represents structure, roles, governance. Another part of the cube represents information and metrics. Another side represents people and rewards. Continuous improvement is the 5th, and culture and leadership is the final side of the cube. Now, I'm going to show how that cube metaphor plays in. When we think about transforming an organization, perhaps counterintuitively, we actually start by assessing the current results of an organization. You'll see that indicated over on the far right of the page. And then we go to the far left and we ask, well, what's going on in the market and the environment? And then we begin to make some choices. What should our strategy be? What organizational capabilities do we need to have in order to win and compete? And finally, how do we begin to operationalize or execute the organization in order to pull that off? As we think about those things, we sometimes use the language strategy clarification, macro level alignment, micro level alignment. And the cube helps us as we get deeper into the alignment work around taking the strategy and saying, how do we set up the work, the structures, the metrics, the talent, the culture, and other things to be able to facilitate the attainment of our strategy. And that's how we really think about organization alignment. And if we take this framework a bit further and we think about strategy just at a little bit deeper level, strategy is really about how do we want to be seen from the market or from the customer's perspective, and how are we going to win over the competitors that we're competing against. The capabilities core question really comes down to what muscles does the organization need to have that's going to drive a differentiated position in the market, the reason people are really choosing us. And then finally, how do we best leverage those capabilities and actually execute and operate against those? And that's kind of how we think about the design process. So as we just dive in now to some of the areas where we think or we're seeing a need for organization transformation, I want to have you keep in your minds this cube model and the cube metaphor, because even though the needs, the impetus, the misalignments that you might see in these different areas are different, the method for how we might go about achieving better or proper alignment is going to follow some of these same sequence of events and approaches that I've just quickly walked through. So let's dive into the first opportunity. And for those that are interested, for me, there's a lot going on out there around sales. And one of the things that I feel like is happening is that organizations over time have had their selling organizations evolve from doing selling into doing a lot of account management, doing a lot of service, doing a lot of, call it support, back office work, and things like that. And there's sort of this renaissance, if you will, of sales organizations saying to themselves, wait a minute, we actually exist to sell stuff, not just to fill out contracts or not just fulfill orders or things of that nature. And so to kind of break this down a little bit further, to talk about, this opportunity, there's a couple of maybe takeaways. The first is when we're looking at our sales organizations and the resources that we want to apply against selling, one of the trends that we're seeing is that we need to design for two things: to simplify for the customer the buying experience. Sometimes we've made the buying experience complicated, and certainly on the consumer side, organizations are making that simpler and simpler. But on the B2B side, we sometimes have made things quite complicated. Lots of forms to fill out, approvals, credit checks, and other things that go on, which actually put friction into the buying process and that make it difficult. We also haven't always equipped selling organizations with that compelling value proposition that they can take to the market. And so as we think about it, if we understand how to simplify the buying process for the customer, whatever industry we're in, that leads us then to the notion that we can isolate some of the work that we do in an organization that really helps drive strategy. And so we call that distinctive work. And so once we know what that distinctive work is, we can begin to design the roles, the structures, the metrics, the talent, and the other parts of the cube around that distinctive selling work. Now, you've probably been wondering for the last couple of minutes, down in the corner, I've had these, random selection of green and red boxes. And what those are meant to represent are just work activities, okay? There's no magic. I kept the diagram quite simple. But when we think about isolating the distinctive work of an organization, what we're really talking about here is saying, can we pull that distinctive work out of the noise of all the things that a selling organization has to do and find a way to design an organization that goes after and is set up to really deliver that distinctive selling work. This might mean that we have to break it into two or more parts so that the remaining, in this case, green activities, which may not be all that distinctive, still get done and performed, but are done in a way that don't distract us from the crucial distinctive selling activities that are going to drive a buying experience the customer wants. Now, I've put up here some data about an actual case study. One organization that I had the privilege to work with several years ago had a situation in their current state where the selling organization was doing just as I described a minute ago. They were doing about 90% of their sales were just refilling and doing replacement orders. And there were only about 10% that were really new customer sales. And so the organization was experiencing, not surprisingly, limited growth. Things were, fine, it was steady state, but there was really no growth quarter over quarter. So when we sat down to say, how do we transform this? We started to say, what are the activities that really contribute the most to finding and converting a customer into a sell? And that's when we said, let's pull out those distinctive activities and set up the selling organization. And when I say that, I'm not just talking structure now. Think of the cube. What metrics would I hold those selling people accountable for to drive those distinctive selling activities? What kind of skill sets and talent do I need? What other organizational support would I put around it? Are there some processes that we need to put in place? Are there some digital tools that could help? And we thought about those things. And what ended up emerging was a design that not only carved out that work and set those activities up for success, but we also started to say, what do we do with the rest of these green, less distinctive work activities that sales had been doing? And we set up a pretty robust inside sales team that then handled almost all of the refill and replacement orders. Now, that gave them consistency in their base revenue, and it turned the selling organization back into going and finding new customers and selling things. And within a very short amount of time, they started to see some pretty significant growth. Now, I don't want to say that this is the formula for every sales organization, but I would use it as an illustration to perhaps highlight how we can sort of look at sales and sort of reinvigorate it with the focus and purpose that it exists to do and to serve. I'm going to pause here before we move on to opportunity number 2. I've had a question come through which I'd like to respond to, and it has to do with the term that I may have thrown around at some point around strategic fit. When we think about the strategic fit, I'm going to ask you to envision for a moment the Rubiks Cube. And if you think about each side of the Rubiks Cube representing a dimension of the organization, one tile on every side of the Rubiks Cube does not move. So when you start to turn the Rubiks Cube, every tile on it can move except for the center tile on all of the sides. That's stationary, and all the other tiles move around it. Well, if you think about that center tile, that to me should represent kind of the strategy. So when I start to look at the work side of the cube and I have strategy right in the middle, I ought to be thinking to myself, how do I move the work and design it, set it up, and orchestrate it so that it fits with the strategy that I'm shooting for? That's one level of strategic fit. The other is that I'm not only looking at one side of the cube, I'm looking at all of the sides of the cube. And I have to make sure that they work together in harmony. So I don't get credit if I just solve the green side of the Rubik's Cube. I have to solve all 6 sides. And in a similar way, strategic fit is making sure that we align to that strategy and also make sure that we align among all the other choices. So thank you for the question. It was a great one. And I encourage others to please chime in if you have them.